Hello there and welcome. This is Teresa Litchfield. I'm excited to share some techniques with you that give your stamping a more realistic look. I'm joining the blog hop for the new Build a Flower Coneflower release with Altenew. I found a picture that I loved and wanted to use it to recreate the flowers. I also wanted to use a realistic background and decided to use the wood floor in my craft room that my husband and I actually installed, and I did the finish on it. I thought that would make a really pretty backdrop. Here's the cards that I came up with as a result of those ideas. If you follow me, you know just how much I love detail, and these techniques are really easy to do. Here's the new beautiful Build a Flower Coneflower set with all those beautiful blooms, and they have a really great die set that cuts out the two blooms as well. And they always have a really great booklet that gives lots of ideas in it. And this is my first time opening this up. And I'm just so surprised because it's kind of on the same lines as the flower I want to make. They always have some really good coloring suggestions as well as the layering guide inside of it. The stamp I'm going to use for the background is the Walk in the Woods stamp set. And here's the idea booklet for that. They also show in this mostly the suggestions they show, it's on the vertical. I'm going to actually turn it and use it on the horizontal side. I've got a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of cardstock, and I placed the stamp on the horizontal, and I'll put that on the lid of my MISTI. I'm going to use Distress Oxide ink for the background, and I'll use Pumice Stone first, and then the other three will be accent colors. I'm also going to use Unicorn White Pigment Ink, and I'll use a brayer to smooth out the inks on my stamp. So I add the Pumice Stone to my stamp, and then I'm going to take the brayer, and that's really an important step because you don't want all the marks on the stamp from the ink. So the brayer really smooths it out so you don't have any of those lines. And then I stamp that. So the Pumice Stone is kind of a light gray, but I want to start out with that color and kind of build upon it. The oxide inks are just really a good idea to use with this technique because they're really chalky and they smooth out really good. So here's the gathered twigs, and I'm just putting a little bit here and there on that stamp. And again, I didn't clean off the brayer. I just am bringing it all into each other and add that to the stamping. And it just got little marks of it. And it starts to really look like the wood floor. So now I'll do the same thing with the weather wood, and I'll try and add that to different places. I can still kind of see where the gathered twigs was, and so again I'll bray it, and I didn't clean out the brayer. I'm just mixing them all in, and it just starts to add some depth to it. I'll now add the breast corduroy, and I'll do the exact same thing with that. And that color just really has some warmth to it, so it'll kind of warm that up. I kind of chose all the colors because I saw all the colors in the wood, and I felt like these would really replicate the look of that. You can really see the variation of colors of where I place all of those, and I like that they're not solid. They're just little bits here and there. I'm going to use the Unicorn Pigment Ink. I cleaned off the stamp, and I'm going to use that now to kind of soften everything. And it just does it a little bit. You could totally skip this step if you like the color that you had already. I just wanted to soften it a little bit more. I take that out of the MISTI, and I'm going to use Hickory Smoke to go around the edges. And I keep my foam I use with the mini ink blending tool and the oxide ink organized in a little binder by name, and they're ready to go. So I'm going to take that foam for that color, and I'm going to just shade around the edge of it and just add a little shadow. With each one of these steps, it adds a lot more texture and dimension to it. That shadow really adds a lot to it as well. I put that back in my MISTI, and with a large stamp like this, I always like to place my cardstock 2 inches up and 1 inch from the side on that sticky mat. I'm going to stamp it with embossing ink and then heat emboss it with clear embossing powder. and that's going to add some more texture to it as well. And then I'll also trap the ink underneath it. I also kept the Stamp in the Misty just so I could stamp this again. After I've heat embossed that, you can see it really has a lot of shine to it. And I want it to be more matte. And so, but it gave it the texture I wanted. So there's 3 different ways you can mattify that, and you can use the sanding block and sand over it. You can also use Distress Glaze and the ink blending tool, and also a fixative, the Clear Finish Matte Spray. So I started out by using the sanding block, and it just takes the shine off the top of it. So it leaves a little bit of it, but just takes most of it off the top. So now I'm going to try the Distress Glaze, and that will get a little bit more down in the crevices, but that will mattify it as well. So just depending on what you have, the sanding block is the easiest. I'm going to try the fixative spray, and I take it outside in a little splat box and spray that on there. And I found that I actually liked the sanding block best. So now that I'm done with the background, I'm going to start on the flowers. And I take the outline stamp for the flowers. I'm going to stamp that with the jet black ink. I'm going to come back later and use the obsidian, but I use the dye ink first so I don't smear anything as I'm coloring it. I also leave the outline stamp in the Misty so I can come back later and stamp it. So I flip the Misty around, and I'm putting the first layer of the solid most layer on the flowers. I'm actually going to use 2 inks. So I start out with Canyon Clay ink. I'm going to put that on the stamp. But then I'm going to use chamomile also with the large detailed blending tool that just came out. So I put that on the stamp, the Canyon Clay, and after I'm done with that, I come back with a rag, and I'm just going to wipe off the very edge of that because I want the edges of that flower to be yellow. So, and I use the ink blending tool, and I use that because I just like how soft it is. I feel like I can blend the 2 colors together without any harsh edges on that. And you can also do it again, which I do. I do it twice. I let it dry in between the times I stamp it, and I build it up to the color that I like. I'm going to use fuchsia on the next layer, and the large flower has 1 extra layer of stamps. So I'm going to just do that one, and I'm going to stamp just on the inside rim, so it's closest to the center of the flower. And I'm going to stamp that with the fuchsia. And then I just take my microfiber towel and just kind of blot away and just soften it on the edge. I really want that orange to stand out. So I do that, and then I think I stamped it twice. And then I took the stamp for the second size flower there, and like I said, it's only got 3 layers, with the large one has 4. But I did the same technique with that, where I stamped in the center and then blotted around the outside. So for the large flower, here's the 3rd layer of the large flower. I'm going to use fuchsia again. So I let that dry, and I'm stamping over the top of it to make that part even darker. To add even more depth, I'm going to take the ruby red and the blending tool again, and I'm going to stamp on the inside rim closest to the center again to just push that back and give it more of a shaded area. All these inks are really giving a lot of dimension and depth to it. So now for the center, I'm going to use ruby red for the first layer of the center, and then grapevine for the second layer. And they're the same on both flowers. I really love the Altenew inks for this reason, where they have the 4 colors to a family, and you can get just the right color. And here's grapevine for the second stamp for the centers. Here's a look close up, and I've left my cardstock on this sticky mat the entire time, just so I can flip it around and have good placement. For the leaves, I'm going to use Grass Fields, Shadow Creek, and for the second layer of that, I'm going to use the Mountain Pine. So here's Grass Fields, and I do the same thing as I did with the flowers. And I just kind of dab off a little bit of the ink, and I'm using the Shadow Creek on the ends to give just a little more depth. And then I'll use the Mountain Pine for the second layer of the leaves on both flowers. And I'm just going to stamp that solid. I'm not going to do a mixing of inks on that layer. I'm super happy with how these are turning out. They just look so much like the photograph I found. The ink colors are really nice and I'm just really happy with it. I'm going to push it back a little bit further and use some colored pencils to just add some detail and brighten up the colors even further. I'll just kind of quickly go through some of the colors I'm using and why I'm using them. This is dark purple and I'm using that in the center to kind of push back around the edge of that center. And then I use indigo blue, which is a great color instead of black. I use that all the time. I learned that from a class I took at Vanilla Arts, and that indigo blue just comes in super handy. I use a little bit orange, and then I take some yellow and I'm gonna match that up and add that to the edges and some pink. And then I add a little bit of white on the very edges of the petals, just to give it a little highlight to them. I take that indigo blue again, and I'm adding that to the leaves. Again, that color is just super handy. And this is dark green, and add that to the leaves. And you can see here, that just even takes it a little bit further. So I kept that piece of cardstock on the sticky mat the whole time. So now I can stamp the outline again, and it's perfectly in the place where it should be with that obsidian pigment ink. And look how much that obsidian ink just made those flowers pop. The color on them is just so vibrant. I let the ink dry and then cut them out. And here's the finished card. I embossed the sentiment from the set with antique silver embossing powder on black cardstock and popped that up on 2 more strips. I also added 2 more plain white die cuts from the flowers to give them dimension. And here's the sentiment from the set that I used, and it has lots of great ones in it. I had so much fun creating this card, and I thought it really turned out like the photos. And it was also fun to create a background that looked like my floor. I hope it inspired you and you'll give this a try. It really is gratifying to give a lifelike look to your stamping. All the products are listed in the description below. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate a thumbs up. I also have a couple of videos here at the end that you might find fun as well. And thank you for stopping by as always. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day doing something you love.